Thank you. Well, I better explain how I actually started on this project. It was a somehow accidental research encounter that led to this project on a nude dancer, Adorée Villany. I was looking for reactions in Danish newspapers to the political breakthrough for a new constitution in Denmark on 24th of March in 1915, giving women and servants the vote, as well as abolishing an extra vote for the upper house for the richest men in the country. The only headline about women that day, though, was the nude dancer, which therefore caught my eyes, as well as the rather unusual name, Adorée Villany. So I Googled her and found the photo that you can see on the right. I also found a section on her in Karl Tepfer's book on nude dancers. In this, she's described as the first of her kind, although Tepfer interprets the photo I had found as though she was uncomfortable about her nudity. I, though, interpret it as a deliberate display of dramatic mimicking. There are hundreds of photos of her where she seems more than comfortable in her spare clothing. Also, Tepfer claimed that she virtually disappears after 1913, only showing up once in Stockholm in early 1915. Well, here she was in Copenhagen a few months later, so I decided to trace her career and to try to fit the story of a nude dancer into my conception of what Danish morals and view on women and the body was like 100 years ago. I managed to purchase a copy of her book on reform dance and pseudo-morals from 1912, adding to my fascination. It is very tongue-in-cheek, displaying a remarkable level of reflection and awareness of the way her performances challenged morals at the time, especially given the fact that she was supposed to be only 20 years of age at the time of writing. She even has a chapter in the book consisting of a fictional guided tour of an Adorée Villany museum in the year 1950. The book was published in the middle of a press storm that followed her arrest during a performance in Munich in 1911. Papers from all over Europe, both Americas, Australia, and probably even more places, reported the dramatic event, which in one stroke made her name famous all over the world. She had circumvented censorship by making her show a private event, sending out invitations to thousands of artists and well-off citizens of Munich. But the police had turned up and arrested her and tried to find someone in the crowd that would testify that he or she felt offended by her clothing, or rather lack of it. In vain, it turned out. But a several-month-long court case, a petition from artists in Munich that her performance was indeed art, and her book suddenly made her stand out from the other dancers making the European scene at the time. Just over a year later, history and publicity seemed to repeat itself as she was arrested and tried in Paris, also this time publishing a book to make maximum use of the publicity of a court case. But whereas the case in Munich even created a political storm, the Paris case fell rather flat. The background was the same. She had once again sent out invitations, only this time a recipient felt offended and complained to the police. The press, and apparently also the judges, found the entire case a bit silly, and Villany was fined without much fuss. Afterwards, she was allowed to perform alongside, among others, Mata Hari at the Folies Bergère in Paris. Before taking a closer look at how she went on from Paris and into the, certainly according to Tepfer, unknown, there's reason to reflect on her identity. Where did she come from when she suddenly hit the headlines as an alleged 20-year-old French dancer in Munich? In her books, she claims that she was brought up in France, her father being a Hungarian doctor and her mother French, hence her Hungarian name. During the trial in Munich, however, some papers claimed that her real name was Erna Reich and that she was a mediocre Prussian Jewish actress. I found an actress, Anna Reich, mentioned in newspaper reports in 1897 and 1902. This certainly doesn't fit with Villany being 20 in 1911. But anyway, that claim is highly unlikely. I found her appearing as Viola Villany as long back as 1904. She would only have been 12 or 13 at the time, and such a young age would probably have been mentioned in the reviews. It is noteworthy that the gap in time between Viola Villany appearing on stage and Anna Reich disappearing in reports is not that big. If she was indeed a German actress who had reinvented herself as a younger, eccentric French nude dancer, she followed a common trend among dancers to create new identities, like, for instance, the Dutch kindergarten student Margaretha Selle, who reinvented herself as the Javanese princess Mata Hari. As the Great War broke out, the question of origins became of great importance, especially for an artist who spent most of her time touring the German and Austro-Hungarian empires. Was she a French spy, or was she indeed a German pretending to be French? No wonder that she preferred to go to neutral Scandinavia already in 1914. She first appeared in Sweden, then in Norway, before arriving in Denmark in March 1915. Even though all the Scandinavian countries were neutral, espionage also took place here, and inevitably, rumors surfaced in Sweden that the nude dancer was a spy. But, unlike the rumors about Mata Hari, the rumors about Villany quickly died away again, as they seemed to be unfounded. Villany's first performance in Copenhagen was billed as the one and only performance the Copenhagen police had allowed her in the city. But as hundreds were locked out of the full casino theatre with 2,500 people inside, the director of the Danish circus building saw the chance of boosting the appeal of his winter show. He applied to the police for permission for 6 performances in the circus variety, and as the attending police officer for the show in the casino theatre had found nothing indecent about her performance there, the permission was granted. She had only been completely naked in a single dance, and that was a silhouette dance behind a white curtain. The police sent a couple of experienced officers to attend her first performance in the circus variety as well, and their verdict was the same. There was nothing indecent about it. Nevertheless, the Christian Vigilia organization complained to the police about it and got some newspapers to complain as well. The deputy commander of the police then went to have a look for himself for the second show in the circus variety, but he didn't find any reason to withdraw the permission for her to perform. However, when the director of the circus a couple of days later applied for a renewal of the permit, it was flatly refused by the head of the police force. Villany was banned from performing in Copenhagen. Villany made another couple of efforts to perform on stage in Denmark without being very successful. Instead, she recorded a film which went on to become the main box office movie in Denmark in 1915. This makes it even more remarkable that her performances in Copenhagen were banned. To understand what all the fuss was about, let's take a look at how newspapers from different strands of Danish society covered the entire affair. Apart from a lot of adverts, there was surprisingly little build-up to her performance in the Danish papers. Only 2 of them bothered to interview her before them. A social liberal newspaper, which had been running a campaign for free cultural expressions for decades, and a boulevard press paper, which had sprung from the very same social liberal paper. To both papers, Villany expressed her discontent with a lack of interest. That was not what she was accustomed to. The social liberal paper stressed on the one hand that it was just the bourgeois morality that could get upset with nudity, but on the other hand, this paper questioned whether Villany's performances were real art and found the fact that she had written 2 autobiographical books proof that she had way too high thoughts of herself. And finally, they pointed out that she was too skinny. She was not allowed any quotes in this paper. In the boulevard press, however, if the quotes are correct, Villany gave the paper exactly what it wanted. Stories about a morning bath in milk and champagne, that her maiden gave her massage and shaved her, and that she liked to go for a walk deep in the woods naked. That was just what the paper wanted to tell their readers. As for the reviews of the first performance, arguably the most surprising thing is that the Christian Vigília organization, much to their own surprise, did not find her performance provocative. The reason why they called for a ban was purely a matter of nudity. It's also noteworthy that the social liberal paper, while positive, thought that she didn't belong in a theatre. In other words, the show did not live up to their concept of real art. The Boulevard press once again focused on the nudity. That was what it was all about, according to them. The only review that really would have pleased Villany was the one in the Social Democrat paper. They thought that this was an art attack on the bourgeois culture and morality, showing the beauty of the unspoiled human body without corset and other disfiguring bourgeois constraints. When Villany reappeared on stage at the Circus Variety, calls for her to be banned were immediately heard. So let's see how the different newspapers responding to those calls. It's not surprising that the Christian and conservative papers, the Christian one without having seen her performance, highly recommended the ban, whereas the Social Democrats and the Boulevard press were scornful of the hypocrisy of these papers and the Christian organization. Interestingly, the Social Liberal paper became much more sympathetic towards her now. Prior to that, she was not quoted at all, but seen as a skinny girl thinking too much of herself. Now she was described as a sympathetic, well-mannered Latin artist, and she was allowed to plead her case in the paper with very long quotations. The all-important thing, however, was the stance of the police. During the preceding 15 years, a number of cases taken to court, and even more discussed within the Ministry of Justice, had led to certain specific criteria developing for whether a picture was indecent or not. The first criteria was a matter of topography, which parts of the body could be seen. By 1915, it was only incriminating if private parts or pubic hair were shown. The second was a matter of iconography. Was it a provocative situation depicted? Still, if a picture was found indecent on one of these two accounts, it could still be acquitted if it was established that it was art, that is, a copy of a picture in a museum or in an art gallery. Both these pictures shown here were acquitted. The one to the right as a work of art. They sent all these postcards showing paintings to artists and asked them for evaluation. Could this be from an art gallery? And if so, they didn't raise the case. The one on the left, because it did not transcend the borders of topography or iconography, but this only after discussions with the ministry, who ordered the police to go back to the shop to find more blatant examples so it could be prosecuted. But although, you know, you can see her shoulder, you can see in the background a picture of somebody kissing, it was not infringing any of these criteria. As for musical and theatre performances, there were also two sides to the evaluation. First, the manuscript describing the action and all texts had to be approved by a state-appointed censor. And then the police had to evaluate whether the performance, gestures and clothing changed the overall impression and turned it into indecency. The police was not happy with this arrangement, arguing that it was next to impossible to stop something that had been approved by the censor. But when Vigília in 1912 asked the Minister of Justice to make the censor and police take a firmer stance on the many showgirls performing in tights that were barely distinguishable from the bare flesh, however, police and censor agreed that it would make Denmark a European laughingstock if they were to forbid something that was quite common all over Europe. Apparently, the only show that was stopped by the police before Villany was the show of the older of the 5 renowned Danish Barrison sisters in 1901. Lona Barrison had a show in circus band as she performed in riding breeches, sitting astride the horse, rather than riding side saddle in a long gown as censor had approved. With Lona Barrison having a reputation for scandals all over Europe before she arrived in Denmark, this fairly innocent alteration was deemed offensive. But why was Adorée Villany banned? Compared to the policy on indecent pictures, her show neither overstepped the topographic nor the iconographic borders that had evolved in the preceding years, much to the dismay of Virgilia. You could argue that it was because of pressure from Virgilia, but on top of their failure to get the Minister of Justice to crack down on female artists wearing tights, they had several other failures relating to indecent pictures. The direct influence of Virgilia was, after all, limited. There must have been something else in the case persuading the police to act. Arguably, the most important point was Villany's record from Munich and Paris, whereas police and censor had found it a valid argument against the call for a ban on tights that it would make Denmark a European laughingstock, since they were permitted everywhere else. This very same argument came back to haunt them now, given Villany had been taken to court in Munich as well as in Paris. In some ways, it had been a similar story 14 years before, where the very reputation of Lona Barrison made it unacceptable to ride astride a horse in riding breeches. An extra ingredient has probably been the fact that these performances were to take place in circus rather than in a theatre. You couldn't really claim that a circus performance was art. And finally, Villany's French identity may have played a part. In Denmark, French was synonymous with something daring and forbidden. Where did Adorée Villany go from Denmark after the ban on the movie? She went to Sweden, where she was hit by bans in a few cities, but also enjoyed huge success and popularity in many others. If you go to this town Östersund today, you can meet an Adorée Villany character on the town walk. That's the one you see on the right. And they have a Villany file in the local archive with somebody's scrapbook, some billboards, a copy of a French book, and a letter from the creator of the scrapbook promising the recipient to tell more about her and about her fabulous waist. At one time in 1916, she apparently planned to go to the United States, but that came to nothing. Instead, she stayed in Sweden, and in 1919, she spoke on how to obtain a fit and slim body for a female crowd at the Royal Academy in Stockholm, in Swedish. In 1922, she got a positive review from an acclaimed critic in Berlin, and in 1923 she performed in Vienna, where she followed one of the new post-war scandal acts, Anita Berber. On one of the first nights of the show, a young student threw stink bombs onto the stage, and the next day, Villany refused to go on stage unless she was insured for 3 billion marks. The director was desperate, but with a sellout crowd waiting for the show to start, he gave in. The hitherto last mention I've found of her is from early 1924. Villany was back in Munich where the scandal began. The billboards promised that there was nothing scandalous about the show, and the single newspaper review I found of the show agrees. The reviewer scornfully writes that far from being a scandal, Villany's show cannot provoke anybody at all. In fact, she cannot really anything. If she was indeed Anna Reich, who started performing in 1897, she must have been in her early 40s rather than her early 30s by then. Perhaps it was time to retire. In the autobiography of a ballet dancer, he tells that for his first ever job, he was hired by an aging Adorée Villany in Vienna in 1923 to do some dancing in the background. Or perhaps what used to cause a scandal could no longer make anybody raise an eyebrow. Censorship had broken down in the old empires, and nude dancers could be found everywhere. Or perhaps she reinvented herself again, finding a new identity better suited to the new times. I'll certainly be looking for her in the archives.
has set the benchmark. That was exactly 20 minutes. How impressive is that? Well done, Hans. Okay. We've got 5-10 minutes of questions before next week. Okay, I'll start then. Is this a way of compensating for not having talent?
You're talking about hands or the dancing?
Basically, and
Well,
so that causes, you know, some kind of like interest which wouldn't be there if you tried singing.
her argument is that apart from going back to ancient cultures, a lot of her dances, most of her program is Egyptian dances, for instance, where she make a dance over the postures of ancient Egyptian motifs, and she has made dresses that look like the one that you can find traces of. So there's this argument that she's trying to go back to an ancient culture before modern Western civilization disfiguring the body. She's very much into this, that ballet disfigures the female body with the corset and everything, and you should express the body freely. And also, just like when you perform as an actor, that you use your face for expressions, you use your body, instead of forming it into something different, shaping it, putting it into some different shape, you have to show it to express it properly. Having said that, she's so well aware that a way to get attention for her dance is this image. And I find this interview with the Boulevard Press, I mean, when she gets to speak finally with the social liberal paper, it's all about the ballet, that she's critical of the ballet and what it does, and she wants to do something else. And she sees Isadora Duncan as the source of inspiration for her. But when she speaks with the Boulevard Press, she's well aware that what they will write about and what will get her the attention is this, you know, I'm having a bath with milk and champagne and walking in the wood naked. And, you know, that's what they love. So she's aware of things going on and, of course, uses it to some extent for publicity. But if she can, she restricts it, but because she's very much focused on wanting to perform in a theatre. That's important to her. It's only when she cannot be allowed to perform in a theatre, she will go to a music hall or the circus variety because she has to earn the money. But to her, and she stresses this, it's about being accepted as an artist at the theatre. And what I think, of course, it is still a publicity stunt that can work both ways. If you take, for instance, Mata Hari, most people agree, you know, she couldn't dance, and she was very much, you know, showing nudity. That was all it was about. Here, you know, some of the reviews say that she looks almost chaste in her dances, and some people are disappointed with it because they expect something different. They want it to be, expect something provocative and daring, and if you come with that anticipation, it falls a bit flat. Whereas others, you know, she's used as a benchmark in some reviews later on, where you get people who are not naked but do dances, and they say, well, she may be a big name anywhere, but we have seen Villany dance, so we don't think any of it. So, but the big discussion is this: is it art or is it just a media stunt? And I think she uses the media stunt to get attention for an artistic project. She also does other things, like, for instance, when she's banned, she does this in Denmark and also other places. First of all, she goes to the police station and asks, how much clothes do I have to wear to be allowed to perform? And they won't speak with her at all. Then she offers to do her dance with a body painted completely black in a room with black curtains on the background and no lights, if that's okay. And, you know, it's not. But she challenges this and have many ways to provoke and test the limits. That's also what it's about. And then you can say, is she a modern total performer, you know, using films, this conceptual art, you know, dancing. She does that in Sweden, actually, managed to do this blacked out dance, you know. So
that's a tension between art and display.
yeah.
Right.
Hans, were you able to use digital search technology to find her name in newspapers?
Yeah, very much so. And I still, you know, things pop up. That's how, particularly in Austria, they have a good database for it. In Denmark, I've gone through the social liberal paper, all the ones by hand, and then I found when there was talk about her, I went to the other papers as well. But they're now digitizing the Danish papers, so I've been able to check that I've found everything. But also from Sweden, Norway, Germany, and many other bases. So yeah, that's the way of one way of trying to track her, and then also look in the archives, you know, for cases that have arisen.
Yeah.
Is she operating entirely on her own, or does she have an agent, or does she have a partner? Many jazz performers say in America you have a very dodgy partner hanging around in the background, raging off. Or is this simply about her expressing her views about art?
I have not found a partner mentioned, and in one of her books she says that her parents, you know, they wanted her to marry, and she says, imagine me marry, so I had to be, have to comply with the husband's wishes, you know. She thinks that's outrageous. But in the book, she has a photo of an agent at that time in 1911. When she comes to Denmark, she gets a Danish agent. And when she is banned and some performances come to nothing, it ends with a court case. The agent files against her to get some money out of it for the work that he has put into it, to what came to nothing. And when there are the rumors of her being a spy in Sweden, having had meetings at a hotel where there are some dodgy people attending, she claims that the only person that she had held meeting with at the hotel was her agent in Sweden and the directors of the various theatres. So it seems that she finds a local agent where she goes. So it's not like the Lona Barrison, for instance, that I mentioned. The 5 Danish Barrison sisters, or they take the name Barrison when they get to the United States. They are found by an exiled Danish socialist over there, who turns them into a provocative act to provoke bourgeois culture with a very indecent show. But he marries the older sister, and they travel around Europe as a couple. And that's quite common, you know, that you have this agent. But I have not been able to find any trace of a person hanging around all the time. And certainly she distances herself from being married. It's, and in many ways I see her as this, you know, she's very aware of this, the female body, that she'll not get married and she's independent. And that what provoked the social liberal press, you know. You shouldn't have a woman performing like that, so as self-conscious as she is.
Take one more and let's just, you know.
I wonder, Hans, if you've been able to establish who the audiences of these performances were in terms of the makeup of social class or gender. Would women come to see it as well, or was this mostly a performance that was attended by a male audience?
What they focus on in Denmark is the amount of white-haired men. And so many men wearing glasses who normally don't wear glasses when they go to the show. But when they list some of the prominent names, there are also a number of women, some of them coming with a husband, but also some women coming on their own. And even before she does this speak at the Royal Academy in Stockholm about the female body, it's a very tongue-in-cheek book, and the presentation of her background is very much to promote an image. But she tells that her first jobs was at German spas, where she held classes for women who wanted to obtain a slim body without the corset. So she taught them about diet and about exercises. And I wonder, in fact, there are a lot of mentions of people speaking about yoga in Denmark at this time, this new interesting thing. And when she does her talk in Sweden, she shows some exercises that people should perform. And the reviewer writes, how on earth does she imagine that these Swedish women would ever be able to do these exercises? It's completely out of the question. It's ridiculous. So I wonder if it's some kind of yoga that she's into at the time.
Thank you, Hans. That's